Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here with another Master Duel video for you guys. Today I have a video that has been a long time coming for some of you. I've seen definitely a few comments asking when the next meta-analysis video is going to be. There hasn't really been one since either the beginning of this season or the end of last season. I think it was the end of last season. So I think we've actually been a full month without a meta-analysis, a series that I do like to typically do a bit more frequently than that. However, there is a reason that we have not seen a meta-analysis until this point, and that is mostly what actually I thought the message was going to be displaying here on Master Duel Meta. It was earlier today, the day that I'm recording this, which is the 26th. But it looks like it isn't up here anymore. But it was kind of a warning that's been up on Master Duel Meta since like about the time all the new stuff came out on the 9th, which was that, you know, the power levels that you see reflected on the tier list here, sorry about that, on the tier list here might not actually be representative of the meta just yet, because the new stuff has just come out and it takes a while for all of the data to come in regarding the new cards and how they stand in the meta, how they do well in tournaments, and how well they do in just on the ranked ladder as well. Now, I will say that the tier list we're seeing right here is still one that's in a state of flux, even if Master Duel Meta is still not seeing that message. So this one's going to be a little bit different. Normally in meta-analysis videos, I like to remain as objective, and that's going to be the case for this video as well, but I typically like to remain as objective as possible. I don't really like to make speculative guesses about what I think is going to be meta, and that's really a lot of the reason why we are, why we're seeing this as the first meta analysis video, post DPE and post Sword Souls, is because, again, I don't want to be speculative. I would rather be objective. I'd rather report on, trends that we can observe and a tier list we can observe, as opposed to me guessing, well, I think this is going to be tier 1, and I think this is going to be tier 2. This video is going to be a little bit of that, but rather than speculating what's going to be tier 1 or tier 2, I'm more kind of speculating a little bit, not much, a little bit on their exact placement within the tiers. So, again, this tier list that's currently on Master Duel Meta that we're seeing right now, I personally consider to be incomplete. As we're seeing here in this representation, we're still seeing that Zoodiac Tri-Brigade is a tier 1 deck, which actually I do still think is the case. Here we see Soul Tenyi in tier 2 with a power level of 10.2 and an upward rising trend. Excuse me, it was about a week ago, I think, that Soul Tenyi first appeared on the list with a power level of, well, down here at like 4, and then it's just been going up and up and up and up all week. And I definitely think it will continue to go up, and I think it will continue to do so even above Zoodiac Tri-Brigade, because if we actually take a look at the top decks here, now this is actually, this shows more of like a list, like a grid of top decks. You can see like just how many Soul Tenyi decks are getting played as compared to everything else. Like, look at this, there's 80 lists for Soul Tenyi, and then like the next highest is 20, which is actually a Sky Striker. We don't actually even see Trizu. Where is Trizu even on here? Oh, it's over here. Okay. It's not that far down, but still 17. It's below Sky Striker and Prank Kids. Oh, which is interesting because Sky Striker and Prank Kids, like, we're seeing the most played decks here are the new decks, Soul Tenyi, and then Sky Striker and Prank Kids are actually two of the decks that were played before that actually benefited the most from the inclusion of DPE. So it definitely makes sense for me to see those being more played as well. That is another thing that makes the tier list maybe not quite so accurate at this time, is not only the fact that the new stuff is just released and it can't be fully evaluated until, some amount of time has gone by, but on top of that, because new stuff gets released and everybody goes hard on it right away, there are some decks out there that are being underplayed because they either got hurt by the last ban list, example Drytron, or typically don't really play any new cards and therefore kind of get left by the wayside because they're not using any of the new toys. Good example of that would be Adamantipator. I still think at this point in the meta, Adamantipator and Drytron are pretty solid, either low tier 2 or upper tier 3 decks, but they're not really represented on any tier list. I think they're both even listed as rogue on the Discord. Why did I say rogue? I have no idea. They're rogue on the Discord, but I think they're stronger than that. Again, I think realistically, if they were seeing proper representation, they would be lower tier 2, upper tier 3. So But that kind of speculation I did just there is kind of what I was talking about earlier. That's the kind of speculation that we're going to be doing. Again, not speculating whether or not a deck will be tier 1, but just kind of like picking it where its place is going to be on the ladder. So, as always, I'm going to be going through the deck breakdowns of all the top decks so we can see percentages, trends, and all that fun stuff. I'm going to be going in order from what I think is the best deck right now, the top of the tier 1, and then we'll go down through tier 2. That's all I really have planned for today, because again, tier 3 and lower is still, I think, shaking out quite a bit. And even though I just said Adamantipator and Drytron are, I think, lower tier 2, I'm actually not going to be featuring those deck breakdowns. Similarly, I actually won't feature Eldritch or Thunder Dragon, even though they're represented here, because if you've been watching this tier list all week like I have, you'll see that like it's been pretty consistently Tri-Zoo, Sword, Soul Tenyi, and Virtual World on this list, and then these last spots kind of are in flux. Like, I actually just checked this earlier today, and these weren't even on here. As you can see, 4.1, 4.2. So, like, there's a lot right now, and it's kind of like how it was last format, right? Like, yeah, there was defined tier 1, tier 2, and even tier 3 decks, but there's still like a lot of really viable lower tier 3/ rogue decks that can still do very, very well. It'll just take so long to go through all those. So, like I said, we'll just go through what I consider to be the top decks, and that's supported by mostly by data, and then also by a little bit by my opinion as well. So let's start with the first breakdown here. Okay, so of course, what else but Sword Soul Tenyi? That's the first deck breakdown we're going to be taking a look at here, as I do consider Sword Soul Tenyi to be the top tier 1 deck at this time. I do think it edges out over Tri-Zoo. For a while, I did consider them to be pretty equal in terms of power level, and I think in a vacuum, they are actually pretty equal in terms of power level, but I think the fact that Sword Soul Tenyi does have a slightly favorable matchup against Tri-Zoo is what ultimately makes it allows it to edge out as the stronger tier 1 deck. Of course, not only the fact that it has a good Tri-Zoo matchup, but that it's got just solid matchups across the board, especially if the deck is going first. Now, if the deck goes second, it can still do some very, very good plays, and it's actually not even always bad to go second with this deck, because then you can very, very easily OTK. It's definitely not hard to get 8,000 damage with this deck. Of course, 1,200 of that often comes from good old Log UN here. So, yeah, let's take a look at the statistics here. So, yeah, the 3 of Ash, obviously that makes sense. Looks like they're all playing Vishuddha, mostly 2, but sometimes 3. That makes sense to me. 2 Tayas, yep, this all makes sense. So the Ecclesia is interesting. It seems pretty evenly split between 3 and 2. I'm personally still using 2. Actually, I just realized by the time that I'm recording this right now, I've actually updated my build yet again, but we haven't seen that yet on YouTube, have we? I think actually, if I'm remembering my timing right, that should be tomorrow's video. If not tomorrow's, then the next day's. But we will see an updated list for my Sword Soul Tenyis. But so I haven't worked on those. But I will tell you this: I do still have 2 Ecclesias myself at this time. Again, just because I like to stay to 40 cards, and I didn't really have room for the 3rd. But definitely not a bad card there. The 1 of Imperm is really interesting, especially as the primary, like, you know, the most decks that are playing Imperm are playing 1 of them. So I've actually kind of noticed that as well, that I've, with my personal build, I guess there's something else I can kind of spoil about, is I did go down to 1 Imperm. Generally, I think in most decks, 1 Imperm is a little bit awkward, but I think it's fine for this deck, because a lot of the reason we're even playing the Imperm, or at least in my case, is for the cross-out designated target, which even though 2 seems to be the primary you know, number of copies used in most decks, I'm actually using 3, because this is definitely like a format where cross-out designator is very, very good. There are so, especially in this deck, there are so many Sword Soul Tenyis running around that you can hit like any number of cards in the mirror match, and it very, very often comes up. So, of course, that, and also the deck being so susceptible to like Maxi, Imperm, Valor, Nibiru, Called By to an extent. I mean, all decks are kind of susceptible to Called By, but all those factors, I definitely think 3 crossout is ideally the way to go here. Now, it looks like the vast majority of decks, about 75%, are using the Hulk and Aurora Online, and the same is true for Protoss as well. So, you know, I don't think my assessment from earlier this format was too off. My assumption being, well, you know, the Halcyon package and Protoss are both nice, but they're not needed. The deck can function perfectly fine without them. And it's true that it can function perfectly fine without them, but there is still a reason that they do see the majority of play, or the play in the majority of these Soul Tenyi decks, and that's because they're very, very good. I'm actually kind of surprised that Halcyon in particular is not seeing more play. We could easily see this percentage continue to go up, but I think after putting those in my deck personally, that they definitely should be in pretty much. I don't want to say all, but like I did change my tune on that. Like, it's not necessary. They're not necessary, but they are also kind of in ways, not only for unbreaking dead hands, but also playing around a Biru, playing through hand traps, like, you know, getting a line that doesn't require you to use your normal summon. It's just so good. Let's see, now down here is where we see some more interesting trends, and these are the more like fringe options. Obviously, we're playing one of the more fringe options in our build, which is the one of Valor. And these 4 cards are actually the ones I probably see comments the most about. And these are the ones I have included in my builds. Desires I'm not really playing in my build because I want to stay at 40 cards. It's actually kind of the reason I'm not playing any of these, is mostly because I want to stay at 40 cards. Vessel I think I am actually about to include again though. Because obviously now that I'm playing Halcyon, Vessel is very, very useful in setting that up a lot of the time. So yeah, we're definitely going to be moving back into Vessels for sure. But yeah, Desires is a good way to get advantage, but I don't want to go above 40 cards. And not only that, it wouldn't just be about, you know, slotting in 3 Desires and going up to 43, but like my current iteration, we're playing a lot of 1 and 2 ofs, and we would definitely need to alter some of like the number of copies of cards we're currently playing in the deck. It would just be a lot of work to include Desires, and I don't really have the desire myself to do that legwork there. I don't think it's particularly worth it for my current build. Again, Vessel, I already said we are going to make room for that again. Heavenly Dragon Circle is actually a card that's been fairly close to making it to into my builds a couple of times. There were a couple of times where I was like very much just like about to include the Dragon Circle. It's really, really nice. It's very nice for unbreaking hands, for playing around hand traps. And the fact that it can actually be used as a quick play spell actually is also really, it's not like really nice. It's niche, but it does come up sometimes. It's mostly, again, it's just a space issue for me. That really is what it comes down to. I just don't have the room for it. And I'm not saying I'll never go above 40 cards. You should, you know, as much as I'm not like a Justin Bieber fan or anything, but like, let's remember his words, never say never, right? That should be our motto when it comes to deck building. Like, we should never say like, oh, I'd never play this engine in my build of this deck, or oh, I'd never go above 40 cards. Like, no, that can't be the mentality we have. We should be open to change. Now, we can't go into the other extreme, right? We can't be like constantly changing our deck all the time just on a whim just to try new things out, because then we're never going to get solid testing with anything. But that's why I did go so long without, without update. And I would see comments like, well, why don't you update the build? Why don't you update the build? And it's like, well, not just yet. I want to make sure that, 1, I have a good understanding of how the deck works as a whole so I can properly evaluate if I need these cards. But 2, on top of that, I need to do testing with this build to evaluate if it could potentially be improved. And if so, if I think it will be improved by the inclusion of stuff like, Halcyon or Protoss. And again, Halcyon, I did end up deciding, like, you know what, I think my deck would actually be significantly improved if I included that, and I ultimately did it. So, don't want to be closed-minded, but don't want to be changing our decks on a whim. So, same with the Shathana, I think is how you say it. Very, very good card. It enables some very interesting lines. I don't know if it's very, very good, but it's a good card. It enables some interesting lines, like I said, but I just don't have room for it at this time, and I want to stay at 40. So extra deck statistics look, about where I'd expect them to be. Seems like this last spot in the extra deck kind of bounces from people, just depending on if they want to do like Herald of the Arclight or Dragite or Crimson Blader. If you're wondering how to make Herald, because I kind of wondered that for a little bit, how to make Herald in this deck, you pretty much use like a level 1 tuner like Adhara plus one of, like your leftover token from the Aurodon combo, is from what I gather. It's just a nice way to set up a Banisher and an Omni Negate at the end. I've actually kind of considered trying it over. I'm currently playing the Dragite. I like the Dragite occasionally on turn 1, but I have noticed myself lately not going into it as often for reasons we'll see when I show off my updated build again. I think that should be tomorrow or the next day that's actually coming out, so I might try switching over to Herald actually for a little bit. I could see myself making that change here in the near future. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that I really have much else to say about Sword Soul Tenyi that I haven't already said in my, you know, any of my deck updates or my combo guide. That was actually a fun thing I liked with Sword Soul Tenyi this season as I was trying it out, was like updating the builds from like 1.0 to 1.1 to 1.2 and then 1.5, and then as I've alluded to a couple of times now, we will see the debut of my 2.0 build for the new season very, very soon here. But yeah, I think that's about all I've got to say here. Let's go and take a look at the next deck. And of course, what was the next deck I was going to put in but Zoodiac Tri-Brigade? So, or the next deck I was going to feature, not put in, you know what I mean. Yeah, so I do think Zoodiac Tri-Brigade, like I alluded to earlier, is still a solid tier 1 deck. I do think it now shares and is a little bit lower than within the tier 1 category, a little bit lower than Sword Soul Tenyi. But again, like I mentioned earlier, I think that's mostly just because Sword Soul Tenyi does tend to have the slightly better matchup against Tri-Zoo there. So, but Tri-Zoo obviously still a very, very good deck for its ability to combo off with very, very minimal card investments. Even if you are playing the Rescue Cat variant, which I am currently still not playing Rescue Cat. Which I'll talk about that here in a second. But of course, I've talked about it before as well. But you know, even if you are playing Rescue Cat, that is another 1-card combo there. So that's always been the strength of Tri-Zoo, is like you can have 1, maybe 2 cards to combo with, and the rest of your hand is just disruptions, and your combo ends on more disruptions, and you can just stop whatever your opponent's doing. It's very, very nice. And I also still like playing the Zoodiacs. I am still playing them myself. It makes going second a little bit easier, just having the option to go into Zeus. Very, very handy. And also just, it opens up combo lines that you don't have access to otherwise. And of course, Trident itself is also still a pretty good card, but Zeus is one of the more main appeals there. So, of course, we are seeing the inclusion of the DPE engine, as we will be seeing with a lot of these decks. You'll be seeing, you know, people slotting these in, or you'll be seeing these with the upward trend, and then other extra cards the downward trend. Looks like Tiger Mortar is pretty universally being dropped. The other slot looks like it's between Racefulgur and Appaloosa. Looks like more people are actually dropping Racefulgur as opposed to Appaloosa. Which I've considered, you know, subbing out Racefulgur and putting him back in Appaloosa myself. I'll still continue to test it this time without Appaloosa, but, you know, like I said back when I was talking about Sword Soul Tenyi, it's like, again, we just gotta think of Justin Bieber, right? Never say never, you know? It's like, it's not that I will never play Appaloosa again now that DP is coming out. It's like, no, I might come back to it, but, as far as knowing when it's right to go back to something or to try something out new, it's hard for me to describe how I know when the time is right. It comes from a combination of, well, not even a combination, it really just comes down to this one idea of really playing a lot of games with the build that you've got. Hang on, let me take a sip of water here. Because once you've played a lot of games with your current build, then you start to notice like how it plays, how you tend to open, how opening hands tend to go, and most importantly, you notice its drawbacks. And you know, I've talked before about sample sizes. Personally, I think your own personal size is always going to be too small. You could play 1,000 games of the deck, and I still don't think you would get a full, proper evaluation of how the deck does in the meta, how it opens. It just takes the data from thousands of players, which is why I like Master Duel meta so much, because it's grabbing data from so many players, giving us a more objective look into how the meta is working, what most people are playing, and what tends to work better. But yeah, let's see, what else do we have here on the upward trend here? Looks like people are dropping Desires pretty much en masse. Like 3 at 49%. I want to say before the new stuff came out, it was like 80%. I think it might have even been like closer to 90. Well, I think it was actually 85. I think it was right towards the middle. 80 to 90, somewhere in there, percent of Tri-Zoo decks were playing 3 of Desires. Now it's down to 50%. Which definitely makes sense to me. You know, I elected Desires was the first thing I cut from my build, mostly because for space, and also the other major reason was the DPE engine. You know, we're playing, you know, one of each Dasher and Celestial. If we banish even one of these with one of our Desires, then that whole engine is offline, and it's just not worth. It's just not worth it. Let's see, it looks like we are seeing another uptick in the side frames being played in Tri-Zoo. In the past, I haven't been a huge fan of them in this deck, but I do think they are better in this meta than they were in the previous meta. So yeah, I actually almost, when testing out my build for the new season that I'm going to use for laddering here, I almost included side frames in my test build, but ultimately just, didn't have the space for them, so... We're also seeing an uptick in crossout designators, which I have included in my newer build. Crossout designator, it's just a great card this format. There's so many things it hits. It's just really nice. I don't really know what else to say about it honestly. Even though it doesn't have an upward trend arrow, I don't think I've seen Imperial Order on this top main deck cards for Tri-Zoo in quite a while now. And sure enough, at 30%, looks like a lot of people are including it. Probably, of course, as a means to counter Fusion Destiny, among other prominent spell cards there. Imperial Order was another card that I came rather close to including in my Season 6 Tri-Brigade Zoodiac build. But again, just ultimately cut it, not just for space reasons. I actually did have the room to include it, but the major reason I decided not to is that... I figured, especially because I'd be climbing from Platinum, assuming we drop back down to Platinum from Diamond, you only go down one rank, which I'm pretty sure is the case. But, climbing up from Platinum to Diamond, I would expect to see rather a lot of, Sword Soul Tenyi decks and the Mirror Match, and Imperial Order is good against a lot of decks, but is not particularly great against either... Sword Soul Tenyi and the Mirror Match can be good. There are games where you just are able to get a tanky or an emergence and just stop them from having plays, but it's very rare they actually need spells to go off. So that was why I elected not to include Imperial Order in my build. And then, of course, Rescue Cat, which I've touched on before, and I said I'd touch on a little bit more. Yeah, I mean, the card is good. I definitely won't deny that. I could even see a world, like when I was putting my Season 6 build together, or like revising my Season 6 build, I was like, I could actually see the slots here. I could see where I could slot into Rescue Cat and try it out. But it's just, Rescue Cat still has all the same weaknesses it's always had, right? It eats your normal summon, and is susceptible to lots of negations and disruptions and hand traps. Like, lots of different effects can stop your Rescue Cat from going off, and I won't deny. I mean, it's a 1-card DPE plus Revolt. It's a good card. I won't deny that at all, and I want to make that perfectly clear. I've always wanted to make that perfectly clear. Just because I'm not running it doesn't mean I think it's bad. I think that's a misinterpretation that people get from how other people talk about cards sometimes, or could even be a misinterpret or what's the word I'm looking for. A little bit of a logical fallacy, like, oh, if it's not strong enough to make the build, what I deem to be the strongest build, then it's not worth playing. It's a bad card. And I don't want to adopt that mentality. So again, just want to make it perfectly clear. If you're playing Rescue Cat, I think that's totally fine. I think it's more than fine. I think it's a good inclusion. I've just elected at this time to still not play it. But if this upward trend continues, like way up, and we're seeing that like more than 50% of Tri-Zoo, not pure Zoodiac, or pure Tri-Brigade, but Zoodiac Tri-Brigade specifically, like, are playing Rescue Cats, then I'll be more inclined to think, okay, obviously the data reflects that most people who are playing this card are seeing success with it, so it might be time to try it out. So as always, we will continue to monitor Master Duel meta as Season 6 goes on, and we will come back and review. But for now, let's go into... I do think Sword Soul Tenyi and Zoodiac Tri-Brigade, those two do stand, I think, as the Tier 1 decks. I don't know that there's another Tier 1 deck at this time. I think those two are still pretty... not far and above, but, they're a decent head up above all the other decks, with, again, Sword Soul Tenyi, I think, being slightly better than Zoodiac Tri-Brigade. But now let's talk about some of those decks that I think are Tier 2. Alright, now here we have a deck that I actually did mean to get back to during the course of this season, but just did not have the time to. I actually meant to get back to it twice over, because before we got all the new stuff announced, because it was kind of a surprise drop right at the beginning of Season 5, before it all got announced, I was planning on doing Bird Up relatively early on in the season, But then, of course, all the new stuff came out, and it's like, okay, well, now I got to learn Sword Souls, and of course, I got way into Sword Souls, and to a degree, kind of neglected other decks, playing them, building them, updating them, etc. That said, as soon as we get through the laddering games up to Diamond 1, I would like to jump back into good old Bird Up here. I'm kind of interested, or I'm kind of curious to know why. I thought that DPE and Vert would just kind of auto-includes in this deck, but I actually don't see them on the upward trend here. And it's interesting that we're seeing a downward trend for Ensemble Robin. It's pretty clear to me that I'm going to have to be doing some research into Zoodiac Tri-Brigade and just to see what's going on with it, because it's been so long since I've played. God, when was the last time? I think it's been about a full month since I've even played a game with Bird Up, which is kind of sad. I do really like the deck, but I mean, honestly, from the deck breakdown we're seeing here, there's not really too much here. Now, if you do scroll down a bit, you can see, recent top decks, and then you can see the dates that they topped. And actually, looking at this, we're seeing the dates the 25th through the 19th. That's really recent. That's within the last week and well into the new cards being out. But only the one build displaying the DPE engine. I wonder. Hang on a second. Let me see something real quick. Let me go to top decks. Let me go to Zoodiac. Oh, I guess this is also the only page of them, or just these 10. Okay. So, that's interesting, though. That's, oh, did I close the wrong tab? I think I did. Shoot. Oh, I'll figure that out in a second. Yeah, interesting, because I do think this deck is performing, from what I've observed, a little bit better than it did in the last seasons. But it's not including DPE. Not a lot of them aren't. Which again is really interesting to me. I actually kind of want to hover over. This is another really nice feature, is just being able to hover over and look at the deck list here. And yeah, I don't know what's going on with Bird Up. Why it's because it's interesting to see, like, Adamantipeter, for example, doesn't really use new stuff, but it's kind of seeing a bit of a fall, and now Bird Up is seeing a bit of a rise. So who knows what's going on there. Actually, if you do, let me know in the comments if you have an inkling as to why that may be, especially for this Ensemble Robin seeing a downward trend. I mean, we don't play this card like all the time, but it's a pretty standard card to end on if you get like a turn 1 combo as Ensemble Robin. So I'm not really surprised to see this being primarily played at 2, the Wagtail. I think 2 is pretty good as far as how many copies you want to play. DD Crow. DD Crow has always been a solid choice in this deck because it's a level 1 winged beast. It's searchable, and it can also enable some of your plays by normal summoning it sometimes, but it's also just in general a really good tech option against who else but DPE. I mean, I guess that could actually be a reason that how easily this deck can search DD Crow. That might seem minor, but that is actually a significant factor. That might actually be it, now that I think about it, is like the fact that you can search DD Crow. Because you do often get to have an extra search with your combos. Yeah, that's really interesting. I would love to know in the comments for people who are more experienced with Bird Up or who keep a closer eye on the meta. I would love to know, like, what's going on with Bird Up. It doesn't really use DPE much, but it's doing better than it was before. Because I haven't really played against it much on ladder either. That's the thing. Like, I see, again, these upward trends with it, and I see people talking about how it's getting better, but I don't really see it that much. So, as always, I turn to you guys to help inform, not just me, but all of us there in the comments there. But all right, let's go ahead and look at the next deck here. Okay, next one we're going to take a look at is good old Virtual World here, which also does not tend to use DPE really at all. But I'm actually not surprised to see Virtual World pretty consistently sticking it out, particularly on the tier list here on Master Duel Meta, consistently sticking it out alongside Soul Tenyi and Tri-Zoo. I actually predicted before we knew Sword Souls and DPE were going to come out that Virtual World was going to get a significant, not like a huge, but a noticeable boost in power from the Master Duel ban list, and that did actually end up happening as we saw, because as we saw, it was just Lao here that went to 2, and that was a very minor change for Virtual World. From what I've both observed playing against the deck before and after the change, and then also from what I've heard from Virtual World players, it was almost an almost nothing hit. Yeah, Virtual World, okay, so the other reason that Virtual World I think is doing a lot better, and this is kind of a minor one, but I think is still very important, kind of like the DD Crow thing, is that we're seeing more people play cards like Valor and Imperm, cards that negate monster effects on the board, because that tends to be pretty good against Soul Tenyi, right? Being able to negate Moye and Hulk, sometimes Rorodon if you have another negation, but the Hulk one doesn't go through or something. But mainly like Hulk and Moye, like being able to stop those two cards is just so good. Virtual World, on the other hand, is a deck that those kind of onboard effect negations like Valor and Imperm do like nothing against this deck. And also like DD Crow doesn't do a whole lot. Ghost Spell, which is another card that I've been playing a lot and other people have been teching more often for against like DPE, and kind of to an extent Sword Souls as well. Like that doesn't really hurt this deck that much. Yeah, so I think those two factors are why Virtual World has been able to stick it out. And, you know, props again to the deck. It's really not moved at all. I think, you know, last format, it was a solid tier 2 deck, and I think it remains a solid tier 2 deck. And as you can see, even within the build itself, like not that much has changed. Of course, we're seeing upward trends in Imperm. We're seeing upward trends in Crossout. I expect to see upward trends for Imperm and Crossout across a lot of different decks. Mostly, again, as a result of Soul Tenyi being, like, by and large the most popular deck. And I think the similar case can be made for why Nibiru is also seeing upward trend here. Other than that, though, like I said, the deck doesn't really seem like it's changed too much, and from what I've experienced playing against it on ladder, and yeah, still pretty much more or less plays out the same. So let's look at the next one. Okay, so similarly to Tri-Brigade Zoodiac, this is another deck that I personally like a lot, but have also been honestly neglecting lately, and that is Sky Strikers. It's been definitely longer than I've played Bird Up since I've played Sky Strikers on the channel. God, I think it's been like 2 months for Sky Strikers, but this deck was like kind of bouncing around tier 3 rogue status for most of the time of last format. I know when Master Duel first came out, I was all like, Sky Strikers are so good, I think they might even be tier 1. It's like, yeah, no. I like the deck a lot, but it definitely wasn't tier 1. But now that DPE is out, this is actually a deck that hugely benefits from DPE. Because you might think, like, well, if the vast majority of decks are including DPE, doesn't that mean that they all gain the same amount of power because they're all gaining the same engine? And no, that is not always the case. In fact, it's not really the case at all. Are definitely, like, decks definitely benefit differently from the inclusion of DPE. Some decks definitely benefit more than others. And Sky Striker was a deck that benefited hugely from the inclusion of the DPE engine. Because Sky Striker's already played a pretty, like, control-y type of game. Not using floodgates, but, you know, just using various tools of disruption and being efficient in the way they you know, recycled their tools and gained card advantage. And DPE is actually a very natural inclusion to that playstyle because it's just like it's another free boss monster you get to just tack on at the end. It can, you know, it's very low commitment, but still very highly disruptive, which is what Sky Striker is all about. Low commitment in terms of resources to start off your board, but then that resulting board still being very high in disruption value. Plus, DPE can also, if you need to activate a Sky Striker spell and your DPE is clogging up a main monster zone, well, it's very easy for you to just, you know, have DPE pop itself and then something else on the board, and then there you go. Now you can use your Sky Striker spells. So it doesn't even really get in the way of that. So DPE's inclusion was very, very nice for Sky Striker and push it up from I think like hovering between tier 3 and rogue status to now I think firmly in lower tier 2, and I think a lot of people seem to agree with that generally, that Sky Striker is a pretty solid lower tier 2 deck. Of course, we're seeing, you know, included in most builds the DPE line. And yeah, this is another one that I've actually included because I did update my Sky Striker build, even though I didn't get to it this season. I would like, you know, like Bird Up, I would like to cover this deck again in an updated deck profile here in Season 6. Do let me know if you would like to see that. But yeah, Pot of Prosperity is seeing a upward trend in play in Sky Strikers, which is interesting because, you know, thinking on it, you know, back, like, it is a pretty natural inclusion if you don't have, like, Upstart Goblins, you know, which most people, you know, the card being an ultra rare for some reason, you know, Upstart Goblin is not a card that most people have 3 of, myself included. I don't have any copies of it. But the prosperities are very nice because it puts a spell in the graveyard like Upstart while also cycling. But honestly, it's pretty easy for us to banish 3 cards from our extra deck, right? Because we play, like, we play 3 Shizuku and 3 Hayate and 2 Zeeks, and, we've got the Kaina and, like, the Celine and, the Nightmare Phoenix, the Unicorn. Like, you don't usually need all of this stuff to win. In fact, it's very rare that in one game you need, like, all these resources. So it's pretty easy for us to Prosperity and toss, like, usually for my first Prosperity, I might toss, like, I don't know, a Shizuku, a Hayate, and Zeke. Just my extra copy of each of those. Because, again, you typically don't need more than, like, 1 or 2 of these and then more than one Zeke. I don't know if I've ever summoned the second Zeke, honestly, playing Sky Strikers, but maybe that just means I'm doing it wrong. As much as I do like Sky Strikers, I will admit, like I said earlier, that this is definitely, of the decks I have built and like to play, one of the ones I'm least experienced in. And I would very much like to change that, honestly. So do expect more Sky Striker content in the next season. And definitely let me know if that's something you would be into there. I'm not surprised to see a downward trend in Harpy's Feather Duster, as we're seeing less decks that rely on back rows, less tries to use more Soul Tenyis, and Eldritch has fallen out of popularity as well. Eldritch was a solid tier 2 deck for, I think, most of the last season. It dropped down to It dropped down to tier 3 a couple of times, but it was, I think, pretty solidly tier 2. Now I think it's definitely, firmly in tier 3. Might occasionally dip down to Rogue, but I think it's a firm tier 3 deck. But yeah, just in general, I think less decks relying on back rows, so not surprised to see a downward trend in Feather Duster and Jamming Waves, I imagine, for the same reason. But I kind of didn't already like, I don't know, Jamming Waves is okay, but yeah, and then we're no longer really we're seeing a downward trend in Nightmare Unicorn, and we don't really see IP Masquerena in here anymore for, I imagine, the same reason, which is that those are often, and along with Nightmare Phoenix, we're often cut to include Vert and DPE here. Okay, I think we have one more deck to look at. Let's go ahead and look at it. Okay, so this one is definitely more of like a kind of a fringe opinion, so to speak. But I did notice on the Discord they put Phantom Knights in the tier 2 category, and I actually 100% agreed. I think with proper representation, Prank Kids could be up here too, but I also do think it's a little bit lower in power level. Prank Kids might be tier 3 right now. That one's borderline, but Phantom Knights, while also actually borderline between tier and 3, I think is actually a tier 2 deck. It is a lower tier 2 deck, but I do think it is actually a tier 2 deck. Because Phantom Knights not only benefited from the inclusion of DPE, but also Artifact Scythe, which is interesting because I don't see Scythe in the main deck breakdown, but I see 31% Dagda in the extra deck breakdown. Which, surprisingly, you might be surprised to hear me say this, considering I, heavily featured the Scythe and Dagda interactions in my Phantom Knights videos, but I actually didn't expect most people to include that. I thought most people would, put in DPE, of course, but I thought it would be less than 31% of people actually playing Dagda, and then presumably also Scythe, but it looks like it's 31% up and rising. I shouldn't be too surprised, though, because as we saw in our Phantom Knight combo guide video, Tour Guide by itself with nothing else is a DPE and Scythe block setup, and as we saw from our example games when we played our updated Phantom Knight deck profile, it's really easy to be going into your, like, Rongo line, but then if you get hit with a negate, just kind of, like, divert into the DPE Scythe block. It's really, really easy to do that, especially because you can often just use Dagda as a material to make your Vert Anaconda. So that's another step of convenience there. But, the Rongo itself, of course, is still extraordinarily powerful, even though it's actually seeing a downward trend in play. Yeah, I actually wanted to talk about that I didn't really touch on in my Phantom Knights video at all. So most Phantom Knight decks are actually taking Rongos out, and they're doing that not just to, as a way of making it less, what's the word I'm looking for? Degenerate, I guess, to play against, because a lot of people, as we know, don't really like playing against Rongo, but a lot of people consider dropping Rongo to be, like, the right call. Like, they're taking out Rongo and Gossip Shadow, presumably for Vert Anaconda and DPE, and maybe, Dagda as well. I kind of elected to take out F-Zero as instead. I took out F-Zero and Draco Future for Anaconda and Phoenix Enforcer, and then since I took those out, didn't really need 2 Levier anymore, so I dropped the second Levier for Dagda. So those were pretty easy cuts from me, but if I can see if you weren't playing those cards, that yeah, I can definitely see, you know, Bamboozling, Shadow, and Rangomede being the go-to drops. I will still be playing those for the time being. That might change when the adventure cards come out. I still need to do more research and do exactly how the adventure engine affects this line as far as what we take out of the main and extra deck, because that's the other thing too. I've noticed ever since including the DPE and Scythe line that the main deck space, if you want to stay at 40 cards, which it looks like, you know, that's the average size still, main deck space is like way tight now. Like I really wanted to include crossout designators, which most people are, but I ultimately didn't really have space for them. I think I might, because it's interesting to see the danger, well, I guess both the dangers presumably, but well, maybe not Tsukinoko. I could see Tsukinoko still being fine because it summons itself, but I actually did kind of consider cutting the Jackalopes. This is gonna sound, I don't know, maybe sentimental is the word I'm looking for, but I just got the Jackalope mate, and I was like, oh, I want to play Jackalope, so I've got the Jackalope mate. But I could definitely see a world where it's just right to cut my 2 Jackalopes for 2 cross-out designators, and if /when, more likely when, because I really do like this deck, when I come back to Phantom Knights in Season 6, we might go ahead and make that change, who knows. Well, as always, keep an eye on the deck breakdown and the tier list as the trends continue to go there. So, alright, those are all the decks that I'm going to cover. There are other decks that I think you could consider being in the tier 2 category, such as, like, you know, Prank Kids, like I mentioned earlier, I think are very borderline. I think they're very close to tier 2, but are still like just a tier 3 right now. You know, Despia variants. Well, no, I don't think Despia variants are tier 2. They're definitely better since the new support came out, but I think they're still pretty... I think they straddle the line between tier 3 and Rogue still. What else? There was one other deck. Oh, Adagnister is like kind of close to tier 2, I think. I think it's pretty firmly tier 3, but it's like upper tier 3. So, Eldelich, like I mentioned, is pretty firmly tier 3. And then just, you know, there's the usual suspect of like Rogue decks that kind of like hover between tier 3 and Rogue, like IDS, like Despia variants, like Dragon Link, like Salamangreats, like, you know, Luna Kaijus, like Thunder Dragons, all that fun stuff. But I probably should have done this during the outro. I guess we'll just transition into the outro. Why not? We'll not do a cut. I was just gonna go back to the tier list and more or less say what I already said anyway. So yeah, I think that's about all I've got for you guys for this video. As far as this is again more of my personal meta analysis as opposed to, I like to do the more objective meta analyses. I think that's right. I like to typically be more objective about it, but just with the state of flux that the meta is in right now, as we're still, and I said this too when the new cards came out, I was like, it's going to be a while before things really shake out and we see exactly where everything is going to be. Like, you know, here we are, you know, almost 3 weeks later at the time I'm recording this, and we're still not, you know, fully seeing exactly where everything is lying here on the tier list. But no, I think my rankings, well, obviously I would think my own rankings are spot on, right? I tried to be fairly objective even when, sorry, that was my chair there. I tried to remain fairly objective even when, you know, including my own personal opinion of what deck breakdowns for us to look at. The Phantom Knights one I think is probably the most, like, my personal opinion. I think the deck is like barely lower tier 2, but I could very easily see people arguing that it's still tier 3, and I wouldn't even really disagree with that. But I guess on that note, I am interested to hear what you guys think of tier 1 and 2 decks, and of course 3 and Rogue. Like, just where do you think every deck falls right now? You know, do you think that Soul Tenyi is a top deck, or do you think it still tries to? Do you think there are other decks that I put in tier 2 that could be tier 1, or maybe decks that I didn't include at all in this video that should be tier 1, 2, or considered 3? As always, I love hearing from you guys in the comments, so do let me know. I would love to get that feedback from you. But I think that is just going to about do it for this video, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. And as we move into Season 6, look out for, of course, updates to the deck that I'm going to be laddering with. And then we're going to be seeing some laddering games, which tend to be the most exciting of the games to watch, which is always nice to start off the season that way. And then, like I alluded to a couple times in this video, we're going to look at some decks we haven't touched on in a while as we move into Season 6. So thank you so much, everybody, for watching, especially to the very end of the video like this. I'm especially appreciative if you are commenting and subscribing as well. Maybe even going in my description, checking out my Twitter and Twitch. Links are available there, but don't feel like you have to do that. As long as you're watching, that is far more than enough for me. I'm just glad you're along for the ride. But without further ado, this is XLex, signing out. Hope you guys have a fantastic day.